It is very ingrained in the American consciousness from George Washington on that we are not an empire. We are not going to come and conquer. At the World War II memorial, beautiful memorial in Washington, D.C., it says we came to liberate, not to conquer. And so this idea that we have enough problems, we have to take care of our people, we have terrible debt, we have, our borders are exploding, all this stuff is happening, we have to pull back. We cannot be spending money fighting the Taliban overseas. That is an argument that you can make in general. Forget about the fact that once we're there, we're there. Still, if you, at some point, if you are an isolationist, you have to pull back, and there's going to be scenes like we saw in Kabul. There's going to be scenes of disaster. But the other argument is also plausible, okay? The other argument is that we are the world's biggest superpower. We are the biggest superpower, certainly, that is in favor of freedom, that has a moral conscience, that is recognizable to anybody in the West. We have to defend those people who are free, because when we defend freedom overseas, it enhances our freedom. It makes the world a safer place. It makes trade better. It makes people more willing to trade. Free people are less likely to go to war because they're busy trading and making money, and they don't have to go to war. They don't want to take anybody else's freedom away. And that order has to be defended by us. It's a question of American identity. Who are we? Are we still George Washington's country that says we're isolated, we're different, we're exceptional, we're not going to get involved in the world? Or are those days gone by and we haven't adjusted to the fact that we are now an imperial power? And I know the word imperial has a dirty connotation, especially on the left, but I'm not sure it should have that, okay? Because our vacillation between these two positions is absolutely what's killing us. And my feeling is this: we are kidding ourselves that we can avoid imperial responsibilities. Empire is a stage in the life of great nations. It is something that happens because you have to defend your borders, and your borders get further and further away. That's just the fact of it. The fact of it is if you are free and everybody around you is not free, eventually you will not be free. I got into an argument once with a Swiss guy at a dinner table who said, well, we had no problem with the Nazis because we could defend ourselves against the Nazis. I said, you can defend yourself against the Nazis until everybody's a Nazi and you're the last country left. Then you can't defend yourself against the Nazis. And I don't care how many Alps you have, eventually, if you're the last man standing, if you're the last free country standing, you will go down. So you defend yourself. You have to defend yourself, and that's how countries get empires. And, as Pericles told the Greeks, an empire may be wrong to acquire, but it's very, very dangerous to let it go. Now, because we have this Washingtonian idea that we should not get involved in foreign affairs, which has stuck with us, we come to liberate, not to conquer, because we have that idea. When England gave up their empire after World War II, there was a tacit understanding with the English, a silent understanding that they were handing the world over to us. That was the idea. But we didn't want to do that because we have this peculiar attitude. We were not going to become an empire. We were not going to conquer. We may have some troops over there in Germany, but we're not telling you how to run your country. We're not doing any of that. And that has been part of our philosophy, as I say, since Washington. But the fact is, we can't do that anymore. We cannot do that anymore. We are a world power in a world where people want power, and we have to defend that world, okay? And one of the funny things that happened, a kind of a strange thing that happened, is we didn't want to become an empire after the British gave their empire away. And then we got into this fight with the Soviet Union, this Cold War with the Soviet Union. And every time we would go overseas to fight them in some place, like when we fought the Chinese in Vietnam, or we would send material into Nicaragua to fight them there, the left would say, oh, it's imperialism. This is imperialism. They elected these communists. This is imperialism. And my response to that would have been, you're right. It's imperialism. We are in an imperial world. Empire is a phase in the life of great nations. The Soviet, it's not a question of whether there should be an empire. It's a question of whose empire is there going to be. Now, Reagan pulled a brilliant trick. He spent the Soviet Union into the ground. So he won the Cold War. He preserved the American empire without conquest. But he did it by driving us into debt. He drove us into debt, and he spent, because we were so rich and because capitalism works so much better than socialism, he drove the Soviet Union into the ground, all while the press was condemning him as a warmonger. That bought us 20 to 30 great years, but 25 fantastic years after Ronald Reagan. Bill Clinton, of course, they love to give him responsibility, but all Bill Clinton was a caretaker for the Reagan Revolution, just like Bloomberg was a caretaker for the Giuliani Revolution in New York. That era ended on 9/11. That's what we're living in now. And what happened was George W. Bush was the kind of president you have during the Reagan good times, like Clinton, kind of incompetent, not really the number one guy. George W. Bush was a great guy. He was a good guy, but he was not up for 9/11. When 9/11 came, he was not the guy you wanted. You wanted Winston Churchill in there. You had George W. Bush, not the same thing. That's what we're dealing with now. We're dealing with the end of the Reagan era, which is essentially the end of the World War II Cold War era. That is what we're dealing with now. This is what is called, the French call it fin de siècle. It literally means the end of a century, but what it really means is the end of an era. I've been telling you this for a long time. Donald Trump was not the beginning of something. He was the end of something. Joe Biden is not the beginning of something. He's the end of something. We are experiencing the end of an era, okay? Something else has now got to come. And one of the problems we have is when that era ended on 9/11, because of our educational system, because our educational system is broken and corrupt and leftist, we did not have a group of young leaders who could come forward with big, new, interesting ideas that would preserve American freedom, but still move us forward into this new global world that we are entering, whether we like it or not, whether we believe in nationalism or not. We are in a global world. Somebody is going to be in charge of that global world, okay? And we have not brought forward the leaders at all, on the right or the left. We have not brought forward the leaders who are going to engineer what that world is going to look like if America upholds its, and I use the word frankly, if we uphold our imperial responsibility. We need a new idea of what the world looks like under an American regime, because those are the choices. And the ideas we have now, woke is delusional nonsense, critical theory is 19th century Marxism dressed up in a pig's lipstick. Trumpism was, there was a lot of truth in what Trump said, but he was no statesman, he was no politician, he could not implement the things that he was talking about. We need people who can not only have good ideas and new ideas, but lead and govern. But we are entering an imperial phase. China is on the move, right? And they've been very creative with their tyranny. We have not been creative with freedom. We've not been creative with Christianity. We have not moved our thinking of what it means to be a free people into this new global world. We are still trying to live in this isolationist Washingtonian world. We're not in it anymore, and we've got to stop talking like we're in it, and we have to stop taking seriously the people who tell us we are not in it. This is going to be an imperial world, and it doesn't have to be imperial by force of arms, but it's going to be imperial by ideas, and it's going to be imperial in the sense that we are going to either spread the culture of freedom or the Chinese are going to spread the culture of slavery. We cannot do this in Afghanistan, Iraq, Iran, Vietnam anymore. When we go in, we are going to stay. When we go in, we're going to stay. This is the end of something. But it's also the beginning of something. There are going to be new people. Do not despair. Do not despair. This is going to be tough. This is a tough moment. This is as tragic a moment as I can remember in a political life, right? This is a terrible, terrible incident brought on by Joe Biden's cynicism and his incompetence. But Western thought has been infinitely creative, and it can be infinitely creative again. Christian thought has been infinitely creative and can be infinitely creative again. We have to start thinking in the realistic world. This is not the realistic world where we can say, oh, there's an atrocity everywhere. This is the world where the entire world is a battlefield, and we are fighting for an imperial place where we are living in a free world, a free global world run by this country, at least intellectually. It doesn't have to be run militarily by it, but run by this country, at least intellectually. It's the end of something, but it's not the end of everything. It's a bad moment. It's a terrible moment, but there are going to be more moments to come. We just have to face the honest fact that we are an imperial power in an imperial world, and we cannot run away from that responsibility anymore. So on we go. Let not your heart be troubled, neither let it be afraid. America has been infinitely creative again. We've been declining since the founding, and we're still here. We're in decline right now, but we're not going to stay that way.